Right, so on with part 2 of this week's sort of plant roundup review thing. So part 1 was pretty good. All the bad news was stuff we'd already known about last week, so let's see how part 2 goes. First up, we have this little lychee, which was the first lychee to go in and has been really lagging, but some good news. A nice little growing tip opening up down in there. Our little dipsis, not doing much, but you can see the growth tip is a little bit higher than it was, so I'm happy with that. Although while mangosteen, the Garcinia livingstoneae, is not actually going up yet, you can see some of the side shoots have decided it's time to start heading upwards a little bit, so I'm really happy with that. Its sibling is still in the sort of hardening off stage of the more recent growth, so not doing much currently, it's just hardening these off, but otherwise nice and healthy, so I'm really happy there. And the jackalberry, which was mostly pink last week, is now a nice green to contrast with the aloe cameroni flowers that are popping up around it, which is looking quite nice, and I'm really pleased with the tree. Little Suriname cherry here has actually regained a little texture, which is really good. And you can see some of these leaves that have gone so red from the stress are going a little bit green again. So that is very good. That means the root system is settling in all right and responding to the rain, so I'm happy with that. Alright, so the little callistemon that went on the same day, it's still a little pale. I think that is just, again, the way these grow, but it doesn't look unhealthy. It's nice and firm, good texture, and there's a little bit of what looks like sunburn, but nothing too major. So Alice, the handkerchief tree with a tortured political history, is looking quite nice. She's been a little bit insect nibbled. You can see still her growing point, the actual tender meristems here, so that the point that will turn into leaves itself has not been nibbled, but the leaf has been. So not 100% happy with that, but not 100% unhappy. Again, a certain amount of caterpillar activity can be really good for regeneration, like as we see with the jackalberry. And her companion, this Dracaena studinary, does seem to be straightening up a little. This growth point seems to be a little bit more open than it was last week, so I'm happy with that. And then you can see our little sand olive, which is not olea like the actual olives. It's a Combretum relative in Dodonia, which don't try and eat the pod, I wouldn't say. But the new growth is opening up really nicely, so I'm really happy with that. I don't know if you'll see it on the sped up part, but we are in a little bit of a butterfly haven right here. A lot of species floating around right now, but this is the Dombeya, and you can see these lovely pink growth points coming up all over it, and yeah, I'm just really pleased with that. We're actually one of the secondary shoots, which was the first to start growing, looks like it might soon be the highest point on the plant, so really pleased with that. And our little Peruvian apple, that actually does look like some new growth right at the tip, that little white bit. Very often it'll look almost woolly right in the growing point, so I'm pleased with that. So our Dovialis, the K apple, is coming up nicely. Well, I say it's coming up nicely. It's a nice green colour. Not much is changing. I'm not actually seeing any current growth, but it's a healthy little plant, so it's probably storing away a lot of energy. Hopefully it'll be putting that into some new growth soon. Original planting of the Bauhinia variegata, you can see is nice and green. These leaves are nowhere near full size yet, but probably for this environment this is a good size for them to settle out at now. So yeah, a fraction of their maximum size, but not unhealthy by any stretch, so I'm happy with that. And very much the same story on its sister, which had been a little bit behind to begin with, but again, nice and healthy in here. Once again, having started really happily, these lemons stay a good colour, but there's some more insect damage and no real response yet. And you know that will eventually become a war of attrition. Can they get anything done before the insects sort of eat them down to stumps? Hopefully they will. Usually they can. So we will see. None of this looks too targeted. So a lot of this is probably incidental. So grasshoppers and stuff eating weeds, eating plants around will have had a nibble and decided, no, that's not for them, and moved on. But if enough of that happens, eventually the seedling that is not doing anything to replace it is not going to thrive. But it's a healthy colour, so I'm not too worried yet. This one, despite having one tiny little citrus swallowtail caterpillar there, is in a healthier general appearance. The lower leaves are starting to yellow off, so it's definitely responding to where it is. You know, getting rid of the ones that are not in enough light, and hopefully it'll start putting that energy into growing soon, because currently it's, yeah, again, not doing anything much. Just looking nice, but nothing happening. Washingtonia number 2, the one that came as a little unexpected surprise in with the original one from day 4. It seems to be settling fine. I'm not seeing any serious sunburn. Maybe that top leaf is a little bit upset with life, but generally speaking it's perfectly fine, and that growth tip is nice and firm, so I'm happy with that. So having been extremely stoic generally, this avocado's main tip has decided to throw in the towel with a little bit of sunburn there, which isn't great, and you can see that extends down the first sort of inch or so of the tip of the plant, which I'm not thrilled about, but we've still got plenty of stem and plenty of little growth points that are trying to wake up. Particularly this one looks like it's going to be doing something soon, so I'm not too worried, I'm just not too thrilled. This second one has me wondering whether avocados benefit from having ants tunneling around the roots, because genuinely this has a lot of lovely new growth on it. It's looking really good and healthy. It is obviously in more shelter, which is probably why the original leaf hasn't suffered as much sunburn, but I'm quite happy with that generally, so yeah, so that's good. On to Fenchurch, she's got a nice little bit of new growth coming just there, so I'm happy with that. No real sunburn, so she hasn't been troubled too much by the dry spell. Ford, who is a little more sheltered but was a little bigger to begin with, I think, has been growing nicely. You can see those two sort of red handkerchief leaves hanging down, so that's really good. I'm very pleased with that. And on to Arthur, who is, yeah, still very much in the don't panic stage. We've got another nice little meristome coming up here, so that should be opening out soon, so I'm very pleased with that. Then we've got Revolfia, so the African quinine, hiding in the shadows here. Just getting that in focus. You can see on these tips that have lost their leaves, there are new growth points, these little bright green spots coming up, so that's really good. So that should be coming out into leaf soon. Happy with that. And on its smaller sibling that beat it to that point, you can see what happens quite quickly once those growth points open out. Some decent sized leaves opening up, just heading upward once again. The Casimaroa, so the Mexican apple that went in with those. You can see this growth point is slowly opening up. It's not nearly as fast as the Revolfia. It's not native, so I suppose that makes sense. It's not as well suited to these conditions. I suspect in a few generations it will be. It's quite an adaptable little tree, but I'm happy enough with that. The other Casimaroa, whose tip got completely burned, you can see lower down the stem, it's reasonably healthy. Nothing's happening yet. It's not responding as fast as the Brydelia did to losing its tip, but hopefully we'll be seeing some changes there soon. And on the very first of those to go in, again we have the tip opening up nicely, and we have a couple of actually other tiny little ones coming along here, just by my thumb there. So that's really good, very pleased with that. Brachystegia spiciformis, here hidden amongst one of these sedges, is looking exactly as it was. This is very much a holding pattern. Hopefully we'll have some improvement soon, but so long as we don't have any decline, I'm happy for now. Making the case for root damage, its originally sickliest sibling is definitely looking nice and green, and I will add it to the count when we get some growth in the middle there, and it does look like there's a growth point coming, but it's still very tiny and tender, so not adding it to the count yet, but it does look like it's on its way to that. With this one, there is still some spring there, but if this does come back up, it'll be coming up from right at the base, I think. I don't think that's going to happen, I'm afraid. And they're generally perkiest sibling. You can see the little red growth point right in the center there. Not looking bad at all. It does look like in a couple of weeks that might actually be turning into some leaves, so I'm quite pleased with that. We've got a happy little Trichilia still doing absolutely nothing, so we'll wait and see if anything happens here. More trees on a holding pattern. So this fig did its first bit of growth and seems to have decided that will do for now. Just damaged the leaf. But yeah, I'm not unhappy, but I would like something to be growing now we have the conditions for it. This little mango I kind of expect to stay in this holding pattern pretty much until maybe September time, not sure. But there is a little bit of a growth point developing in the middle there, but I'll be surprised if that does anything within the next month or so. So our yuccas, number one, has regained a little bit of a flop to its tip. It had started to straighten up quite nicely.
I think the dry weather sort of set it back a bit. We'll see how that pans out. No real change on the dragon fruit. Number 2, very much the same. So we've got a little bit of flop returning. It's still a relatively straight one considering how recently it was replanted, and hopefully it will settle in. But yeah, so no real change there apart from that. The one that was most flopped is still the most flopped and still has no real change to the space. So, you know, holding pattern, I guess. Someone who is not in a holding pattern, for better or for worse, is our little Moringa here, who has lost all of its original leaves but has some nice new ones coming, so I'm happy enough with that. And the winter thorn that went in with it is looking nice and green and vigorous. You can see sort of a hint of what its mature colouring will be, this sort of blue-greeny on the leaves, which is a lovely colour when you have a big tree of it. It's quite striking. And settling in here, we have our little Delanex regia, who really did not like that sudden drying out just after it was planted. But it's nice and green and coming along alright, so I'm happy with that. On to our Malinas, and number 1, perfectly happy with life. Lots of growing points coming out along the bark to add to the ones on the tip. For Idalia number 1, you can see quite a lot of growth opening out down here low on the trunk, which is really nice, and gaining a little bit of stem too, so that should be coming up quite quickly. Malina number 2, pretty happy with life. Likewise, Bridelia number 2 with this nice growth. Malina number 3 and Bridelia number 3, probably being a little slower than its siblings actually, which, you know, sometimes damage can be stimulating. And Malina number 4 and Bridelia number 4. On Malina number 5 we have a little bit of life just coming here in the tip, but it's not doing anything much yet. Our first Jacaranda is looking nice, not really changing much. There's some new growth here, but pretty healthy. As with our sausage tree, it seems like some insects have been quite interested in the growth tip on this little Spathodea. They are the same family, so if the same insects are around, they'll be damaging both. Big no easy, sorry. But I'm not concerned about it generally. What is there is healthy, and it does look like the center of the tip itself is fine. It's just a bit covered in oh no, there we go. So it's not great. I'm not too worried. These are quite resilient. And hope, our little tree hibiscus, is looking nice. There's no real sign of progress. There's a tiny little growth point threatening to do something in the middle there, but not currently doing anything much. We have another happy little Jacaranda, and another. And deep in the weeds we have another happy little Phoenix. Well, I say happy, it's happier than it was. At one point I would still like it to come up a little faster, because it's not doing much at all at the moment, but it's firm, it's not a bad colour, and it seems well settled, so I'll take that. On to our first planting in Malina. You can see this is absolutely happy with life, as is number 2 and number 3. Number 4, a little tangled with some spider webs there, but quite happy. Number 5 is coming along nicely. Our little ghost tree, the growth point is not caterpillar. There is a little bit of sun damage here by the look of things, but there are some lovely little tender yellow leaves coming right in the middle there. Should open up nicely soon. And the Pachira number 1, 2 and 3 seem healthy enough, but in a bit of a holding pattern. On to our Pachira glabra line, and number 1 is perfectly happy. Number 2 likewise. And number 3 certainly seems the most vigorous, some tender growth here. Our little tamarind coming along well, so I'm happy with that. Another happy Pachira, and another one in a holding pattern, and another one coming up nicely. Another one coming along slowly here, and here. And in here, this one isn't doing much at all, but it's healthy, so I'm happy. And our would-be Pachira aquatica, which is probably just glabra. There is a nice little leaf coming there, but not much is happening. Again, we've got a bit of a holding pattern with this one, which has a little bit of sunburn, but nothing too major. And this one is, yeah, healthy, but doing precisely nothing. Okay, and our bamboo, I think that would count as a good assessment for as well. It also seems to be healthy, but doing precisely nothing. Generally speaking, if your bamboo starts to go wrong, it'll start from the base, and down there is nice and yellow, and nice and firm, and not wrinkled, so I'm happy with that. This is actually doing slightly less of precisely nothing. We've got some vigorous new stems coming along here, which seem new. and I'm happy with that. So yeah, happy bamboo. Right, so that should be everything for today. Thank you very much for watching. I would say everything in this part seems to be more or less in a holding pattern, apart from a couple of things with a bit more insect damage. Nothing too serious, I would say, nothing that would get me worried. I do think all of the trees that have that look like they can very much recover with a little bit of water. They're quite resilient types generally. So I'm not too worried. This has been better than last week, I would say, mostly. So thank you very much for watching. Please tune in again 2 days ago for today's planting, for which I do have a plan, which you probably already know by the time you see this, because it will take a while to edit. And yeah, sorry, I seem to have been more zoomed in than usual for a lot of this, so it may have made you extra seasick. Sorry. I will try to do better next time.